The day I came home from the rehabilitation center, my daughter-in-law changed the locks. I stood on the front porch of the house my husband and I built 41 years ago, holding a plastic bag of medications and a walker that still smelled like antiseptic, staring at a keypad where my brass key used to go. For a moment, I honestly thought I had the wrong house. Grief does strange things to the mind. So does anesthesia. So does betrayal. Then the door opened. My son Daniel did not hug me. He did not even look surprised to see me standing there in the November cold. He just sighed like I was an inconvenience that had arrived too early. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." Behind him, Melissa crossed her arms. Perfect hair. Perfect smile. The same smile she wore at Thanksgiving dinner last year when she insisted on hosting because she said I deserved to rest. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have such a thoughtful daughter-in-law. I had no idea that was the beginning of being excluded from my own life. I tried to step inside. Daniel blocked me. "You cannot stay here right now," he said. Right now. Those two words would echo in my head for months. I laughed. Actually, laughed. Because when something is that absurd, your brain refuses to accept it. "Daniel," I said, "my suitcase is already in your hallway." Your father hung that coat rack with his own hands. "What are you talking about?" Melissa spoke before he could answer. "We made some decisions while you were in recovery. It is for the best. For everyone." There it was. That careful tone people use when they are about to take something that does not belong to them. A cold wind slid under my sweater. My hip throbbed. The scar from surgery burned as if it knew I was no longer safe. I asked the question that changed everything. "What decisions?" Daniel looked at the floor. Melissa did not. "We activated the power of attorney you signed before your procedure," she said. "The lawyer advised us to take control of the assets so nothing would be mismanaged." Assets. Not home, not memories, not family. Assets. I felt something shift inside me, like a glass cracking slowly, silently. I remembered signing hospital papers while heavily medicated. Melissa had handed them to me, explaining they were insurance forms. I trusted her. She called me Mom. She brought me soup. She cried at my husband's funeral. Now I understood. Manipulation does not start loud. It starts soft, helpful, loving. Daniel finally met my eyes. "You will stay somewhere else for a little while," he muttered, "until we sort things out." Somewhere else. After 4 decades of marriage. After raising him in that very house. After helping him pay for college. After babysitting their children every Wednesday so Melissa could grow her company. I was being relocated like old furniture. I looked past them into the living room. My husband's recliner was gone. That was when my hands began to shake. "Where is your father's chair?" I asked. Melissa answered casually. "We sold it. It did not match the redesign." Redesign. My grief turned into something else. Something quieter. Something sharper. Family drama does not explode in a single moment. It tightens like a knot pulling itself closed. I nodded slowly. I did not argue. I did not cry. That seemed to confuse them. "Good," Melissa said, clearly relieved. "This does not have to be a confrontation." Oh, I thought, it absolutely will be. Because as I stood there on that porch, abandoned and dismissed, I realized something they did not. I may have been old, but I was not powerless. And they had just made a mistake they would spend the rest of their lives regretting. I turned, walked back down the steps, and called the one person they did not know existed, my husband's attorney. His name was Arthur Klein, and my son had no idea he was still on retainer. My late husband Robert believed in preparation the way some people believe in prayer. Quietly, faithfully, without announcing it to the world. Before he died, he made me promise something I did not understand at the time. If anything ever feels wrong, Ellie, call Arthur. Not Daniel, not anyone else. Arthur. Back then, I thought he was just being cautious. Now, sitting in a small hotel room that smelled like lemon cleaner and loneliness, I realized Robert had seen something coming that I had refused to see. Favoritism, entitlement, greed. The seeds of betrayal had been planted long before my surgery. Arthur answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Harper," he said warmly. "I wondered when I might hear from you." Not if, when. That alone made my pulse quicken. I told him everything. The locks, the power of attorney, being excluded, the missing furniture, The way Melissa spoke about my life like it was a company acquisition, Arthur did not interrupt once. When I finished, he asked one question. Did you sign anything else in the past year? I thought carefully. Melissa had insisted we update some paperwork last Christmas. Said it was routine. Said all families should review their will after a loss. My stomach dropped. Arthur exhaled slowly. I was afraid of that, he said. Afraid of what? Mrs. Harper, he replied. Your original will does not match the documents filed 3 months ago. The room felt suddenly smaller. Filed by whom? By your son. The word son felt foreign. Arthur continued now in full lawyer mode. The new filing significantly alters inheritance distribution. It lists Daniel as primary executor, and several properties have already been transferred into a holding company. What holding company? He paused. A company registered to Melissa Harper. I stared at the wall for a long time. The pattern in the wallpaper looked like tiny vines strangling each other. This was not just family drama anymore. This was strategy. This was theft wearing the costume of care. They were not reacting to my surgery. They had planned this. Arthur spoke again, his voice calm but firm. Your husband anticipated the possibility of manipulation. He created safeguards. They are still intact. But we must act carefully. If they believe you are weak, we maintain that illusion. A strange energy moved through me. Not rage, not sorrow. Clarity. What do you need me to do? I asked. For now, he said nothing that alerts them. Let them think they succeeded. Meanwhile, I will begin pulling financial records. There are inconsistencies already. Inconsistencies. Such a polite word for betrayal. Before we hung up, Arthur added one more thing. Mrs. Harper, your husband left you something else. Something Daniel does not know exists. I gripped the phone tighter. What is it? Protection, he said. And leverage. That night, I could not sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because for the first time since being thrown out of my own home, I understood something powerful. They thought they had written me out of the story, but they had only opened the next chapter. And in that chapter, I would not be the victim. I would be the author. The next morning, Arthur called back with news that made my heart stop. There had been withdrawals, large ones, and they were made while I was still hospitalized. When Arthur told me the amount that had been withdrawn, I had to sit down. $280,000. Not spent. Not invested responsibly. Moved. Quietly. Repeatedly. Like someone siphoning water from a well they did not dig. I stared at the notepad in front of me where I had written my grocery list that morning. Milk, tea, apples, ordinary things. The kind of life I thought I was returning to after surgery. Instead, I was looking at evidence of manipulation so calculated it made my skin crawl. Do they know you can see this? I asked. No, Arthur replied. They believe the monitoring authority ended when Robert passed. They do not know he arranged for extended oversight. I closed my eyes and pictured my husband sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing paperwork with that quiet patience of his. Robert never raised his voice. He never rushed. He simply prepared. He knew. He must have seen the subtle shifts. The way Melissa took over holiday planning. The way Daniel started talking about efficiency and consolidation instead of family traditions. The way decisions slowly stopped including me. That is how toxic family dynamics grow. Not overnight. Gradually, politely. Until one day you realize you have been erased. Arthur slid a folder across the table when we met later that afternoon at his office. Inside were property filings, corporate registrations, and bank transfers. A clean professional paper trail. Too clean. Melissa had formed a company called Silver Ridge Holdings 6 months ago. 6 months. That meant this was already in motion before my fall. Before my surgery. Before the hospital stay they later used as their opportunity. This was never about helping me. This was about inheritance acceleration. I felt the words settle in my chest like a stone. They were not waiting for me to die. They were reorganizing my life so it would not matter whether I did. Arthur tapped a document. Here's where it becomes interesting, he said. Your signature appears on authorization forms transferring management rights. But the timestamps conflict with your hospital records. You were under anesthesia when one of these was executed. Forgery. The word hung between us, heavy and undeniable. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From anger that had finally found direction. What happens now? Now we gather proof without confrontation, Arthur said. If we accuse too early, they will bury everything. People like this rely on appearing respectable. We let them continue believing they are untouchable. I thought of Melissa's calm voice on my porch. This does not have to be a confrontation. I almost smiled. Arthur leaned forward. There is something else. Your husband created a trust years ago. It owns the land beneath your house and 3 surrounding parcels. The deed was never transferred into your personal name. Daniel cannot legally sell or leverage it without the trust's consent. My breath caught. And who controls the trust? Arthur looked directly at me. You do. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt steady. They thought they had taken everything. But the foundation itself still answered to me. As I left Arthur's office, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Mom, we should talk. Melissa says this tension isn't healthy. Come to dinner Sunday. Dinner. An invitation wrapped in false concern. I read it twice, then typed back. Of course, I would love that. Because sometimes revenge does not begin with anger. Sometimes it begins by accepting an invitation. Sunday dinner looked exactly like the kind of evening that used to make me proud of my family. Candles on the table, roasted chicken. The good china I had received as a wedding gift. Melissa had even recreated my cranberry recipe, though she never once asked how I made it. The performance was flawless. If a stranger had walked in, they would have seen a loving family trying to reconnect. A grandmother welcomed home. A son eager to repair things. But I noticed what others wouldn't. The missing photographs. The rearranged furniture. The absence of anything that reflected my life before Melissa arrived. Erasure disguised as modernization. Daniel poured wine into my glass. You look better, he said cautiously. Stronger. I met his eyes. Healing can be surprising, I replied. Melissa smiled too quickly. We just want what's best for you, Eleanor. Managing a large estate is stressful. We are trying to protect you from that burden. There it was again. The narrative. I was fragile, confused, incapable. It was the story they needed me to accept so they could justify what they had done. I picked up my fork, slowly letting silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then I asked a simple question. How is Silver Ridge Holdings doing? Daniel froze. Melissa did not. It's just an investment structure, she said smoothly. Standard practice. Arthur Klein really should have explained that to you years ago. Interesting, I said, because Arthur explained quite a lot to me this week. That was the first crack in her composure. Just a flicker. But I saw it. Predators always assume their target is unaware. The moment that assumption wavers, they become cautious. Good, I thought. Be cautious. Dessert arrived. Apple pie, my recipe again. Almost right, not quite. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, we were thinking maybe it's time to consider assisted living options. Somewhere comfortable. With support. There it was. The final stage. Remove me physically. Control everything permanently. I set my napkin down. I appreciate the concern, I said calmly. But I won't be going anywhere. Melissa's voice sharpened. You need to be realistic. I looked directly at her. I am being realistic. That is why tomorrow morning I am meeting with a forensic accountant. Silence slammed into the room. Daniel stared at me like he did not recognize me. Melissa's mask finally slipped. Why would you do that? I held her gaze. Because I want to understand where my money went while I was in the hospital. No one spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Each second felt like a hammer. I stood carefully, letting them see that I no longer needed the walker. Thank you for dinner, I said. It was enlightening. As I walked to the door, Daniel called after me. Mom, what are you doing? I paused but did not turn around. Something I should have done sooner, I answered. Paying attention. Outside, the cold air filled my lungs. It felt cleaner than anything inside that house. Behind me, I heard raised voices beginning to argue. They were afraid now, and fear makes people make mistakes. The next morning, Arthur called with an update that changed everything again. The forensic review had uncovered a second set of documents, hidden ones, and they suggested this scheme was far bigger than just my family. Arthur did not explain the new documents over the phone. He asked me to come in immediately. That was never a good sign. When I arrived, his office door was already closed. Another man sat at the conference table, gray-haired sleeves, rolled-up glasses halfway down his nose. He stood when I entered. Mrs. Harper, he said, extending his hand. My name is Leonard Shaw. I am a forensic accountant. His grip was firm, direct, not polite in the way people are when they think you are fragile. Good, I thought. I was tired of being handled gently. Arthur placed several files on the table. What we are about to show you, he said, may feel overwhelming, but it confirms you were not targeted by accident. Leonard opened the first folder. Inside were names. Not mine, not Daniel's. Dozens of elderly homeowners. Mostly widows, mostly living within 10 miles of my neighborhood. Each file showed a similar pattern. A helpful relative, a sudden restructuring of finances, property transferred into limited liability companies, then liquidation. My stomach tightened. This is not family betrayal alone, Leonard said. This is a financial harvesting model. Harvesting. Such a sterile word for destroying lives. Melissa had not invented this. She had joined something already in motion. Arthur slid another document forward. Silver Ridge Holdings is connected to 3 additional companies, all formed by the same legal service, all acquiring residential properties under market value, then selling them to a development consortium. I leaned closer to the page. The development had a name. Hawthorne Civic Renewal Project. I had seen that phrase before, on a flyer Daniel brought home months ago. He called it an exciting investment opportunity. Said the city was revitalizing underused neighborhoods. Underused. He meant lived in by people like me. They are assembling land quietly before public announcement, Leonard explained. Once zoning changes are approved, values will triple, possibly quadruple. So they needed control before anyone realized what was happening, I said. Arthur nodded. And elderly homeowners with trusting families made ideal entry points. A chill ran down my spine. Melissa did not just marry into my family. She selected it. The room fell silent as that realization settled over us. I thought back to the early days. Her interest in my husband's property records. Her questions about how long neighbors planned to stay in their homes. Her insistence on helping people simplify paperwork. It had all sounded helpful. It had all been reconnaissance. Leonard turned to another page. Funds withdrawn from your accounts were used as bridge capital. Temporary liquidity to secure additional acquisitions. They used my savings to expand their operation. I felt anger rise, but it was different now. Less emotional, more precise. Like sharpening a blade. Arthur folded his hands. We can dismantle this, but only if we move carefully. If they suspect exposure, they will restructure and disappear behind legal shields. What do you need from me? I asked. Arthur met my eyes. We need you to continue appearing cooperative, especially with Daniel. Daniel. My heart tightened at his name. Despite everything, part of me still saw the boy who built tree houses with his father. But that boy had signed documents that erased me. Leonard spoke gently. Sometimes people inside these schemes are manipulated too. Debt pressure, emotional leverage. We are not excusing his actions. But understanding his position may help us expose the larger network. I did not answer right away, because the truth was I did not know whether Daniel was a victim, an accomplice, or both. Arthur handed me a small envelope. Inside was a copy of the original trust Robert created. Your husband designed this as a fail-safe, he said. If financial abuse was ever suspected, control could be reasserted through a beneficiary activation clause. I looked up. What triggers it? Arthur's voice was steady. Your formal declaration that you were deceived. One signature from me could begin unraveling everything they built. My hand hovered over the document. Revenge is often imagined as explosive, but in reality it can look like this. A quiet room, a pen, and the moment you decide you are no longer willing to be erased. I signed. Arthur nodded once. Then we begin. What none of us knew yet was that Melissa had already realized something was wrong. The first sign came 2 days later. Daniel showed up at my hotel unannounced. He looked exhausted, not polished and confident like before. His tie was crooked. His hands wouldn't stay still. Mom, he said, stepping inside. We need to talk, now. I gestured to the chair. Sit. He didn't. Melissa says you're working with lawyers behind our backs. Behind your backs, I repeated quietly. He ran a hand through his hair. Why are you doing this? You're making things harder than they need to be. There it was again. Not an apology. An inconvenience. I studied him carefully. Daniel had always hated conflict. Even as a child, he would clean his room before I asked just to avoid tension. That same instinct was all over his face now. Fear, not guilt. What exactly are you afraid of? Daniel, I asked. His eyes flicked toward the door like someone might be listening. You don't understand how complicated this is, he whispered. There are contracts, investors, deadlines. Investors. So now we were getting closer to the truth. I leaned forward. Did you know they moved money from my accounts while I was in surgery? He flinched. That was temporary, he said quickly. Melissa said it was legal restructuring. Legal restructuring. Such obedient language. Did you read anything you signed, Daniel? Silence. He sat down finally, shoulders collapsing. I was in trouble, Mom, he admitted. Real trouble. After that commercial property deal failed, I owed more than I could repay. Melissa said her firm could stabilize everything if we consolidated family assets. Family assets, meaning mine. I watched him carefully. Did you ever ask what I wanted? He didn't answer, because he already knew the answer. A long pause filled the room. Then he said something that surprised me. It's bigger than Melissa. I felt every nerve sharpen. What do you mean? Daniel lowered his voice. There are people funding these acquisitions. They expect results. Melissa's father isn't the one in charge. He's just the face. If deals collapse, they don't lose money. We do. A chill crept up my spine. Arthur had suspected an organized network. Now we knew there were financial backers we hadn't even seen. Why tell me this now, I asked. Daniel looked at me, eyes raw. Because Melissa thinks you're weak. But I know you. And if you start fighting, this is going to explode. He wasn't warning me to stop. He was warning me how dangerous the truth was. I stood slowly, feeling the strength returning to my body in ways that had nothing to do with surgery recovery. It already has exploded, Daniel, I said. You just haven't seen the damage yet. He looked at me like he wanted to say something more. But instead, he whispered one sentence that lingered long after he left. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone is on paper. After he walked out, I called Arthur immediately. When I repeated Daniel's words, Arthur was silent for a long time. Then he said something that made my heart pound. We may not be dealing with fraud alone anymore. We may be dealing with coercion. And if that was true, exposing them would not just cost money. It could destroy reputations, careers, and possibly put us in real danger. The following morning, we received notice that Melissa had scheduled an emergency meeting with the development board. She was accelerating the timeline, which meant she knew we were closing in. And desperation makes powerful people reckless. Arthur insisted we move faster but not louder. People imagine revenge as confrontation, raised voices, courtroom speeches, a dramatic unveiling of truth. Real revenge, the kind that survives scrutiny, is built quietly, document by document, fact by fact. And Melissa was now rushing. That meant she was making mistakes. Leonard discovered the first one late Tuesday afternoon. She advanced several property transfers before securing zoning confirmation, he said, pointing at the screen in Arthur's office. That creates exposure. If ownership legitimacy is challenged now, everything pauses. Everything. The word felt powerful. Arthur turned to me. We are going to file a protective petition through the trust. Not an accusation. A request for judicial review of asset transfers involving a vulnerable party. Me. I almost laughed at the phrasing. Vulnerable. It was the same assumption Melissa relied on. Now it would become the lever that stopped her. Will that alert them, I asked? Yes, Arthur said. But not in the way they expect. They will think this is defensive. They will not realize we already have the forensic trail. The paperwork was filed that morning. By noon, Daniel called. His voice was tight. Melissa is furious. The development board delayed approval because of your petition. Investors are asking questions. Good, I thought. Questions were exactly what this operation could not survive. Daniel continued. She wants to meet. All of us. Tonight. Arthur shook his head immediately when I relayed the invitation. You will go, he said. But you will not argue. You will not accuse. You will listen. Listen. We need them to talk. Pressure makes people reveal structure. So, that evening, I returned to the house on Briarwood Lane for the first time since being locked out. Melissa greeted me with a smile so controlled it looked painful. Eleanor, she said, I'm glad you decided to cooperate. Cooperate. Interesting choice of word. We sat at the dining table. No candles this time. No performance of warmth. Just tension. Melissa slid a folder toward me. This petition you filed is unnecessary. It complicates legitimate business activity. I did not open the folder. I'm sure it does, I replied calmly. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Daniel shifted beside her, clearly uncomfortable. Melissa leaned forward. You don't understand the scale of what we're doing here. This redevelopment will transform the entire county. New jobs, infrastructure, growth. You're interfering with something much larger than personal finances. There it was. Justification. Schemes like this always wrap themselves in noble language. I finally opened the folder. Inside was a voluntary compliance agreement. If I signed, I would withdraw the petition and reaffirm Daniel and Melissa's control over the estate. A clean finish. No investigation. No questions. Just silence. I looked up at her. You seem very eager. Her smile tightened. We're trying to avoid a confrontation. Again that word. But this time I saw the strain beneath it. I set the document down. I'll consider it, I said. Arthur had warned me to give them nothing firm. Uncertainty would keep them talking. Melissa exhaled slowly, measuring me. You know, she added, reputations can suffer when legal conflicts become public. At your stage of life, peace might be preferable. A threat. Soft, polished, but unmistakable. I met her gaze. At my stage of life, I said quietly, I value honesty more than comfort. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. He knew this was no longer containable. When I left, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Engine running. Watching. The next morning, Leonard confirmed something chilling. That car is registered to a private risk management firm, he said. They specialize in protecting investment groups during hostile legal disputes. Protecting. Or intimidating. Arthur's expression hardened. We've crossed into enforcement behavior, he said. They're trying to control exposure. That was when we understood. We were no longer just uncovering betrayal. We were disrupting something powerful. And powerful systems do not like being questioned. The hearing was scheduled faster than anyone expected. Melissa's urgency had backfired. By pushing her filings through early, she triggered review thresholds meant to protect against exactly this kind of manipulation. Now a probate judge would examine everything? Arthur called it an opportunity. Melissa called it interference. I called it the first real breath I had taken in months. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. Not in mourning colors. Not in anything that suggested fragility. Just a simple navy suit Robert always liked. Armor does not have to look like armor. Arthur met me outside the courthouse. Remember, he said today is not about winning. It's about opening the door. Inside, Melissa sat with two attorneys I had never seen before. Expensive ones, confident ones. Behind them sat a man I did not recognize. He watched everything without speaking. Investor Arthur murmured. Likely one of the backers Daniel mentioned. So now the invisible participants had faces. The judge entered. Formalities began. Language filled the room. Technical, controlled. But beneath it all was one question. Had I been manipulated? Melissa's attorney argued efficiency. Family consent, estate planning modernization. Arthur responded with timelines. Medical records. Transaction patterns occurring while I was incapacitated. Then Leonard presented the financial analysis. Charts, transfers, shell structures. A visual story of money moving faster than truth. The courtroom grew very quiet. Melissa remained composed, but I saw her fingers tighten around her pen. Pressure was building. Then the judge asked me to speak. Just briefly, he said. In your own words, I stood. Not as a victim, as a witness to my own life. I trusted my family, I said. I signed documents believing they protected me. I did not authorize the removal of my control, my property, or my independence. I am asking only for transparency. No theatrics, no anger, just truth. The judge nodded slowly. That is exactly what this court intends to provide. Review was granted. All contested transfers temporarily frozen. For the first time, Melissa's composure cracked. Not dramatically, just enough. Afterward in the hallway, she approached me. You have no idea what you've set in motion, she said under her breath. I looked at her calmly. Neither did you. Arthur guided me away before she could respond. Outside, the same black sedan sat at the curb, still watching. But now they weren't observing someone isolated. They were watching someone who had stepped into the light. And once something is examined publicly, it becomes much harder to control privately. That afternoon, Arthur received a message from opposing counsel requesting negotiations. He read it twice. They want settlement talks, he said. Already. That was fast. Too fast. Arthur looked at me thoughtful. They're not trying to win now. They're trying to contain what else might surface. Which meant one thing. We were closer to the hidden truth than any of them were comfortable with. And we hadn't even uncovered the worst of it yet. Settlement talks were scheduled for the following Monday. Arthur warned me before we even entered the conference room. When people push for settlement this early, it's rarely about compromise. It's about silence. The room was sleek. Glass walls, polished table. The kind of place designed to look neutral while quietly favoring whoever could afford it. Melissa sat across from me, composed again, as if the courtroom had never happened. Her attorneys flanked her. The unfamiliar investor from the hearing was there too, this time introduced as Victor Langford. He didn't shake my hand, just nodded. That told me everything I needed to know about the power dynamic. Arthur began formally, but Victor interrupted. "Let's not waste time," he said. "We're prepared to restore Mrs. Harper's residence, provide financial compensation, and conclude all disputes." Restore? As if my home were a damaged product. Arthur remained calm, and in exchange, Victor folded his hands. Withdrawal of all legal challenges. Confidentiality agreement. No further inquiry into development activities. There it was. Not a settlement. A purchase of my silence. I looked at Melissa. She wouldn't meet my eyes. For months, she had controlled everything. Now she needed this meeting to end quickly, because something else was coming. Arthur slid a document toward them. "We're not here to negotiate property return," he said. "We're here to address unlawful asset control and coercive financial conduct." Victor's expression hardened. "Careful, counselor." Arthur didn't flinch. "We are." Silence stretched across the table. Then I spoke. "What happens to the other families?" Melissa looked up sharply. "This isn't about them," she said. But it was. Leonard had shown me enough files to understand that my story was only one thread in a much larger fabric of manipulation. Victor leaned forward slightly. "You're being emotional, Mrs. Harper. These transactions are voluntary." I met his gaze. "Were they voluntary when signed under medication?" No one answered. "Were they voluntary when relatives were pressured with debt solutions?" Daniel's name hung unspoken between us. Still no answer. Victor changed tactics. "You're risking years of litigation. At your age, peace has value." He thought that was persuasive. He still didn't understand me. "Peace without truth isn't peace," I said. "It's permission." Arthur placed another folder on the table. Inside were affidavits from 2 additional homeowners Leonard had contacted quietly. Similar experiences. Similar assistance from intermediaries connected to Silver Ridge. Melissa's attorney swore under his breath. Victor finally lost the polished tone. "This will get messy." Arthur nodded. Fraud often does. The meeting ended without agreement. As we walked out, Arthur exhaled slowly. "They expected you to accept the house and walk away." I shook my head. "They never understood what they took from me. It wasn't just property, it was trust. And once that's broken, you don't negotiate to get it back. You make sure it can't be broken again." That evening, Leonard called with a breakthrough. "We traced the funding pipeline," he said. "The development group isn't independent. It's backed by a national acquisition fund currently under regulatory review. Regulatory review meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant exposure. Everything was converging, and Melissa's timeline was collapsing. But the biggest shock came the next morning. Daniel asked to see me, alone. We met in a small public park halfway between the hotel and the courthouse. Neutral ground. Daniel looked thinner than he had just weeks earlier. The confidence he once borrowed from Melissa was gone. What remained was a man finally standing without someone else's script. I didn't sit right away. "You said you wanted to talk." He nodded. "I'm done pretending I understand what I got involved in." That was new. Daniel had spent months defending decisions he barely examined. "What changed?" I asked. He handed me a folder. Inside were internal emails, Melissa communicating with Victor, timelines, pressure points, references to asset aging demographics. I felt a wave of cold anger. That was how they described people like me. Demographics, inventory. "I didn't know about most of this," Daniel said. "I knew we were consolidating property. I knew Melissa's firm had investors. But I didn't know they were targeting vulnerable owners deliberately." His voice cracked. "And I didn't know they were monitoring you before your surgery." I looked up sharply. "Monitoring?" Daniel nodded. "They flagged accounts that showed stable assets but limited digital oversight. You were categorized as low resistance." Low resistance. I sat down slowly. Not because I was weak, because the depth of calculation stunned even me. "Why tell me now?" Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "Because they're preparing to isolate Melissa as the fall person if investigations expand. Victor's already restructuring the companies. She thinks she's still protected. Classic containment strategy. Sacrifice the visible operator. Shield the financiers." Arthur had predicted something like this. Daniel leaned forward. If you keep pushing legally, you won't just fight Melissa. You'll expose people with far more resources. I studied my son's face. This was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. Not because we suddenly trusted each other again, but because illusion had finally collapsed. I'm not doing this for revenge anymore, I said quietly. I'm doing it so they can't repeat it. Daniel nodded. Then you'll need everything. He pushed the folder closer. Passwords, meeting records, names I was never supposed to see. I didn't touch it immediately. Helping me now won't erase what happened, I said. I know, he replied. I'm not asking it to. That was the first time he sounded like my son again. Not redeemed, but accountable. As we parted, I realized something unexpected. The story wasn't about destroying him. It was about forcing him to confront who he had allowed himself to become. That afternoon, Arthur reviewed the materials Daniel provided. This changes the scale entirely, he said. We're no longer just defending your estate. We're cooperating with an emerging investigation. He paused, then added carefully, once this moves forward, there's no quiet ending. Public filings, depositions, possibly federal attention. I thought about the porch, the locked door, the moment I was excluded from my own life. There had never been a quiet ending available. Let's finish it, I said. Arthur nodded. Then we proceed. The formal complaint would be filed within days, and when it was the carefully constructed world Melissa built, would begin collapsing in full view. The formal complaint was filed on a gray Thursday morning. No dramatic announcement, no television cameras, just a series of legal documents entered into the public record, each one methodically outlining patterns of financial exploitation, coercion, and fraudulent transfer structures tied to Silver Ridge Holdings and its affiliates. But quiet actions can create very loud consequences. By noon, Arthur's phone would not stop ringing. Regulatory agencies requested copies of Leonard's analysis. 2 additional families came forward after hearing their situations might not be isolated. One attorney from another county called simply to say, "We've been seeing something similar." We didn't know how to connect it. Now they did. Melissa, for the first time since I had known her, lost control of the narrative. Her lawyers issued statements calling the claims mischaracterizations. Victor's firm distanced itself publicly, describing their involvement as limited financial participation. Limited, as if millions of dollars moved themselves. Arthur read those statements aloud to me in his office, raising one eyebrow. They're creating separation, he said. When structures start collapsing, everyone looks for a smaller piece of responsibility. And Melissa, I asked. Arthur sighed. She's being left exposed. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was something closer to inevitability. Schemes built on manipulation rarely end with loyalty. A week later, depositions began. I sat in a conference room again, but this time there was no performance of authority across the table. Melissa looked exhausted, her confidence replaced by something brittle. She avoided looking at me. Her attorney asked procedural questions. Arthur countered with timelines and documentation. Leonard explained financial mechanics in precise language that left little room for interpretation. Then Melissa was asked directly when she first began identifying acquisition targets. She hesitated. That hesitation lasted only seconds. But in legal settings, seconds matter. Her answer shifted responsibility upward. To advisors, to investment expectations, to market pressures. The structure she once presented as visionary redevelopment now sounded exactly like what it was. A calculated system that depended on people trusting the wrong person. Afterward, as we gathered our things, Melissa finally spoke to me. Not loudly, not angrily, just tired. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. I looked at her carefully. It always does. She swallowed as if wanting to explain something more. Perhaps justify. Perhaps confess. But explanations were no longer mine to receive. Consequences had already taken their place. Outside, Daniel stood waiting. Not beside Melissa. Not beside the attorneys. Just standing there alone. That image stayed with me longer than anything said inside. Because redemption, if it exists at all, doesn't arrive in speeches. It begins in discomfort and continues in accountability. By the time formal actions expanded beyond our case, I realized something unexpected. This was never just my battle to reclaim a house. It was a reckoning. For a system. For a family. For the quiet ways people convince themselves harm is acceptable when it's labeled opportunity. And as the legal process moved forward, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Robert died. Not victory. Stability. The kind that cannot be signed away. It has been nearly a year since the day I stood on that porch and realized I had been excluded from my own life. The house on Briarwood Lane is mine again, not because someone gave it back, because the law recognized what should never have been taken. I moved slowly when I returned, not rushing to restore everything at once. Healing, I learned, is not renovation. It's reconstruction. Intentional, patient. Robert's chair is back by the window. I found one nearly identical at an estate sale. Sometimes I still expect to hear him turn the newspaper pages. Grief doesn't disappear. But it changes shape. The broader investigation is still moving through its channels. Some companies dissolved before they could be fully examined. Others remain under review. The work is slow, deliberate, often frustrating. Justice, unlike revenge, does not move quickly. Daniel visits every Sunday. We don't pretend the past didn't happen. We don't force forgiveness into conversations where it doesn't yet belong. We talk about ordinary things, weather, books, his attempts to rebuild a career honestly this time. Trust is not restored with apologies. It's rebuilt with consistency. Melissa accepted a negotiated resolution months ago. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the legal acknowledgement of responsibility and the end of the structure she helped create. I do not hate her, but I do not carry her anymore either. There's a difference. Arthur still calls occasionally to check in, though our formal work is done. Leonard sends articles about financial protections for seniors, always with a note that says, "Still watching the numbers." And me, I started volunteering at a community legal resource center twice a week. Nothing grand, just sitting with people who feel overwhelmed by paperwork they don't fully understand. I tell them the one thing I wish someone had told me sooner: ask questions, even when it feels uncomfortable. Especially then. Because silence is where manipulation grows. If you had asked me a year ago what revenge looked like, I might have imagined confrontation. Punishment. A moment where everyone who hurt me understood exactly what they'd done. But that isn't the real ending. The real ending is this. I wake up in my own home. I make my own decisions. And no one signs my name to anything without my voice attached to it. That is justice. That is freedom. And if this story made you think about your own family, your own boundaries, or the importance of protecting yourself, then it has already done something meaningful. So before you go, take a moment, like this story, share it with someone who might need the reminder. And subscribe, because there are more stories about truth, resilience, and yes, sometimes karma still to come. You never know which one might help you see your own life more clearly. And that is how we take our power back.